You don't belong in first class, and you certainly don't belong on my plane." Those were the last words Captain Richard Sterling ever said to the woman standing at gate B12. He saw a hoodie, a backpack, and black skin. He saw a security risk. What he didn't see was the signature on his own paycheck. He didn't realize that the woman he was publicly humiliating was Elena Vance, the newly appointed, covert CEO of Stratosphere Airways. He thought he was protecting his aircraft. In reality, he was signing his own termination letter. This is the story of how arrogance crashed into power, and the karma that followed was absolutely turbulence-free. The fluorescent lights of Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3 all hummed with that specific, headache-inducing frequency known only to weary travelers. It was 5:45 a.m. Outside, the tarmac was a grey wash of rain and sleet, but inside Gate K4, the air was dry and smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. Elena Vance adjusted the strap of her backpack. It was a battered leather piece she'd had since law school, well-loved and unassuming. She wore a charcoal grey hoodie, leggings and running shoes. To the untrained eye, she looked like a college student heading home for the holidays, or perhaps an exhausted nurse coming off a triple shift. She did not look like the woman who had just brokered a $4 billion merger between Stratosphere Airways and the logistics giant, Pegasus Cargo. She was tired. Bone tired. The board meeting in New York had run until 2:00 a.m., and she had flown commercial to Chicago to catch the connecting flight to London. She wanted to see the operation from the ground up, undercover boss style, but without the cameras. She wanted to know how her employees treated the average passenger before she officially took the helm as CEO the following Monday. She approached the podium for Flight 402 to Heathrow. Her boarding pass was digital, displayed on her phone. It was a first-class ticket, paid for out of her own pocket to avoid alerting the corporate travel department. "Good morning," Elena said softly, holding her phone out to the scanner. The gate agent, a young woman with the name tag Jessica, looked up. She looked frazzled. The computer was beeping incessantly. "Zone 1 only, ma'am. Economy boards in 20 minutes. "I am Zone 1, Elena said, her voice steady. "Seat 1A. Jessica blinked, her eyes darting from Elena's casual attire to the 1A on the screen. There was a micro-hesitation, a pause Elena had felt 1,000 times in her life. It was the pause of disbelief. "You? In 1A? "Oh," Jessica stammered, reaching for the scanner. "Right, sorry. The machine is being a bit... Is there a problem here?" The voice was deep, authoritative, and laced with irritation. Elena looked up. Emerging from the jet bridge was the pilot. Captain Richard Sterling looked like he had been cast in a movie about the golden age of aviation. He was tall, with silver fox hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and a uniform so pressed it looked sharp enough to draw blood. He was the picture of competence. He was also, as Elena knew from reading his personnel file, Stratosphere's most senior pilot, and its biggest liability. Sterling had 3 HR complaints against him in the last year alone for insubordination and hostile work environment. But he was untouchable. He was the poster boy, the union rep, the legend. "No problem, Captain," Jessica said quickly, shrinking back. "Just scanning this passenger in." Sterling's eyes landed on Elena. He didn't scan her face. He scanned her clothes. He looked at the hoodie, the lack of makeup, the natural hair pulled back in a simple bun. His lip curled slightly. It was a micro-expression of disgust, gone as quickly as it appeared, but Elena saw it. She had a PhD in reading rooms. "Ticket check," Sterling demanded, holding out a hand. He didn't ask. He ordered. Elena paused. A pilot rarely checks tickets at the gate. "The agent already checked it, Captain, and I'm checking it again." Sterling stepped closer, invading her personal space. We've had issues with fraudulent upgrades lately. System glitches. Elena held up her phone again. Sterling looked at the screen, then back at her. Elena Vance, one way to London. He looked at her backpack. This is your carry-on. Yes. It looks overstuffed. It won't fit in the overhead bins in first. They're smaller on the 787-9. It fits, Elena said, calmly. It's soft-sided. It fits under the seat if need be. I don't like loose items in my cabin, Sterling said, crossing his arms. You'll have to gate check it. Elena felt the heat rising in her chest. Her laptop was in there, containing the confidential restructuring plans for the entire airline. I cannot check this bag. It contains sensitive documents. And per stratosphere policy, soft-sided bags under 22 inches are permitted in the cabin. Sterling laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You're quoting the manual to me? I wrote the manual, sweetheart. He turned to Jessica. Check her bag, or she doesn't board. Captain, Elena said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming colder. I paid for a first-class seat. That space includes overhead storage. I am not checking my bag. Sterling stepped forward, towering over her. The gate area had gone quiet. Other first-class passengers, mostly white men in suits, were watching. None of them intervened. They looked at Elena with curiosity, waiting to see if she would cause a scene. Here's how this works, Sterling said, pointing a manicured finger at her chest. I am the captain. Under FAA regulations, I have the final authority on who and what enters my aircraft. If I say you're a safety risk, you stay on the ground. A safety risk? Elena repeated, incredulous. Because of a backpack? Because of your attitude, Sterling sneered. You're combative. You're arguing with the flight crew. That's a federal offense. Now, hand over the bag or step out of the line. Elena looked him dead in the eye. She saw the arrogance, the absolute certainty that he could crush her because of who he was and who he thought she was. I'm not giving you the bag, Richard, she said. The use of his first name hit him like a slap. His face turned a mottled shade of red. That's it, Sterling barked. Jessica, close the flight. This passenger is denied boarding. But Captain, Jessica whispered, she's 1A. I don't care if she's the Queen of England. She's refused. He turned his back on Elena. Get security down here. Have her escorted out. The silence at gate K4 was deafening. Jessica, the gate agent, looked like she might throw up. She typed furiously on her keyboard, her hands shaking. Captain, please, Elena said, not pleading, but offering him one last lifeline. You are making a mistake, a very expensive mistake. I suggest you let me board. Sterling spun around on his heel. Are you threatening me? Did you hear that? He scanned the crowd of onlookers. She just threatened the pilot. That's a terroristic threat. A man in a navy suit, standing near the priority lane, cleared his throat. Actually, Captain, she just said it was a mistake. I didn't hear a threat. Sterling glared at the man. Mind your business, sir, unless you want to stay in Chicago, too. The man held up his hands and stepped back. The message was clear. The captain is God. 2 TSA agents and a Chicago police officer approached the gate, responding to the silent alarm Sterling had presumably triggered. What's the problem here? The officer asked, hand resting near his belt. Disruptive passenger, Sterling said immediately, putting on his professional aviator voice. Refused crew instructions regarding luggage. Became belligerent. Used threatening language. I want her removed from the terminal. The officer turned to Elena. Ma'am, step aside. Elena didn't move. She stood her ground, feet planted. Officer, I have a valid ticket. I have complied with all TSA regulations. The captain is denying me boarding based on personal bias, not safety. Ma'am, the airline has the right to refuse service, the officer droned. If the captain says you don't fly, you don't fly. Grab your bag and come with us, or we will have to arrest you for trespassing. Elena looked at the digital clock above the desk. 6:05 a.m. The flight was scheduled to push back in 25 minutes. Fine, Elena said. She picked up her bag. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't give Sterling the angry black woman narrative he was so desperate to provoke. She gave him something much worse. Absolute silence. As she was escorted away from the gate, she saw Sterling smirk. He adjusted his hat, winked at a young flight attendant standing by the door, and disappeared down the jet bridge. He had won. He had cleared the riff-raff from his elite cabin. Eleanor walked about 50 feet, flanked by the officers. I need to make a phone call, she said calmly. You can call your lawyer from outside the secure zone, the officer said. I'm not calling a lawyer, Eleanor said, pulling her phone from her pocket. I'm calling David Thorne. The officer frowned. Who? The chairman of the board for Stratosphere Airways. The officer rolled his eyes. Yeah, sure, lady, and I'm calling the president. Eleanor ignored him. She dialed a number from her favorites list. It rang once. Eleanor? David's voice was groggy. It's 6 a.m. in New York. Did you land? No, David. I'm currently being escorted out of O'Hare by the police because Captain Richard Sterling refused to let me board Flight 402. There was a silence on the other end of the line. A heavy, pregnant silence. He did what? He denied me boarding, claimed my backpack was a safety risk and that I was combative. He's currently prepping for takeoff. Elena, are you telling me the pilot just kicked the new CEO off her own plane? Yes. And David? Yes? Don't stop the flight. What? Elena? I can have that plane grounded in 2 minutes. I can have Sterling fired before the wheels leave the tarmac. No, Elena said, stopping in the middle of the concourse. The officers stopped too, confused by her sudden halt and the tone of her voice. If we stop him now, he'll claim it was a misunderstanding. He'll get the union involved. He'll say he was just being cautious. I want him to fly. Why? Because I need to get to London, and I'm going to get on that plane. But I need you to override the gate terminal. Force the system to clear me, and I need you to call the tower at O'Hare. Tell them Flight 402 has a VIP late board protocol. Elena, you're playing a dangerous game. Sterling is an egomaniac. Exactly, Elena said, her eyes narrowing as she looked back toward gate K4. I want him to feel safe. I want him to think he got away with it. And when we're at 30,000 feet, I'm going to introduce myself. You're going to allow a man who hates you to fly the plane you're on? He doesn't hate me, David. He underestimates me. There's a difference. Just clear the code. I'm going back to the gate. Elena hung up. She turned to the police officer. Officer, in exactly 30 seconds, the gate agent's computer is going to receive a red flag override from corporate headquarters. It will authorize my boarding and flag Captain Sterling for a mandatory report. If you arrest me now, you will be arresting the CEO of the airline you are currently standing in. Do you want to take that gamble? The officer looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the quality of the watch on her wrist for the first time. He saw the steel in her spine. 30 seconds, the officer said. We'll wait. Back at the gate, Jessica was closing the flight. The printer whirred. Suddenly, her screen flashed red. A message popped up in bold block letters. Priority. Boarding authorization. Directorate level. Vance, Elena! Jessica gasped. Her phone rang immediately. It was the station manager for O'Hare. "Jessica!" the manager screamed into the phone. "Who is at your gate?" A passenger." "Ms. Vance. Get her on that plane. I just got a call from New York. That is not a passenger. That is the boss. If that plane leaves without her, we are all looking for new jobs by noon." "But," Captain Sterling said. "Screw Sterling. Open the door." Elena walked back to the podium. The officers had hung back, sensing the tide had turned. Jessica looked at Elena with wide, terrified eyes. "Ms. Vance, It's okay, Jessica," Elena said gently. "Just scan me in." "The captain, he's already in the cockpit. The door is closed." "Open it," Elena said. Jessica keyed in the code. The pneumatic hiss of the jet bridge door opening sounded like a starting pistol. Elena stepped through. She walked down the narrow, accordion-walled tunnel. The cold air of the aircraft hit her face. She stepped onto the plane. The flight attendants were already doing their safety demo checks. The purser, a woman named Beverly, looked up, startled. "Ma'am, we're closed up." "Gate reopened," Elena said, flashing her boarding pass. "Seat 1A. Beverly looked confused, but saw the verified stamp on the mobile pass. Right this way." Elena settled into seat 1A. It was a wide, plush leather seat. She shoved her backpack under the seat in front of her. It fit perfectly, with room to spare. From the cockpit, the intercom clicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sterling. We apologize for the slight delay at the gate. We had a security issue that has been resolved. We're just waiting on final paperwork and then we'll be in the air. Flight time to London is 7 hours and 10 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the service." Elena buckled her seatbelt. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. "Enjoy the service," she thought. "Oh, I intend to." The plane pushed back. Sterling had no idea that the security risk was sitting 10 feet behind him. The trap was set. Now, all they had to do was fly. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner climbed smoothly through the cloud layer above Lake Michigan, banking east toward the Atlantic. Inside the first-class cabin, the noise of the engines was nothing more than a sophisticated hum. The lighting was a soft, calming azure. Elena Vance sat in 1A, looking out the window as the grey Midwestern winter gave way to brilliant, blinding sunlight above the clouds. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Almost immediately, Beverly, the purser, was at Elena's side. Beverly was a woman in her 50s who wore her uniform with pride, but whose eyes currently held a flicker of nervous energy. The gate incident had rattled the crew. They knew something strange had happened. A passenger denied by the captain, then forced on by corporate. But they didn't know the specifics. "Miss Vance," Beverly said, offering a hot towel with silver tongs. "We apologize again for the confusion during boarding. Can I start you off with a beverage? Champagne? Perhaps a mimosa?" Elena took the towel, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. "Just sparkling water with lime, please, Beverly." "Thank you." "Of course. And would you like to see the breakfast menu, or would you prefer to rest first?" "I'll look at the menu later. I have some work to do first." As Beverly retreated to the galley, the intercom clicked on again. It was Sterling. "Folks, we've reached our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. We've got a hefty tailwind today, so we might even get you into Heathrow a little ahead of schedule. The ride should be smooth. The flight attendants will be coming around with the service. Sit back, relax, and let us do the driving." His voice was rich, confident, and oozing with self-satisfaction. It was the voice of a man who believed he was untouchable, a man who had just handled a problem at the gate and was now king of his domain. Elena reached under the seat and pulled out the oversized leather backpack. It slid out easily. She unzipped it and retrieved her laptop, a sleek, company-issued machine that contained the entire nervous system of Stratosphere Airways. She booted it up, bypassing the standard login and using her executive biometric scan. The screen filled with data. She wasn't just looking at spreadsheets. She was looking at the soul of the company she now ran. She navigated past the merger documents and opened a specific personnel folder. Sterling, Richard J. Employee ID, 0901. Elena took a sip of the sparkling water Beverly had placed on her console. She began to read. Sterling's file was a fascinating study in corporate inertia. He had been with the airline for 30 years. His early career was stellar. Air Force background, perfect safety record, technical brilliance. But about 10 years ago, the file shifted. There were the HR complaints, of course. 3 in the last year, all from younger, female flight attendants or junior first officers, citing demeaning language and a rigid, authoritarian cockpit culture. Each complaint had been resolved by middle management, with a note stating, "Captain Sterling has been counselled. It was code for, he's too senior to fire, so we patted him on the wrist." But Elena was looking for something else. She looked at his operational metrics. In the last 5 years, Sterling's flights consistently burned 4% more fuel than the fleet average for the same routes. Why? She dug deeper into the flight data logs. Sterling refused to use the automated fuel optimization descent paths recommended by the new flight computers. He preferred to fly hands-on, descending aggressively and then powering up on approach. It was an old-school, cowboy way of flying, fun for the pilot, expensive for the airline, and uncomfortable for the passengers in the back. He also had the highest rate of maintenance write-ups for minor cockpit issues, complaints about seat cushion firmness, air vent angles, the brightness of console lights. He was a diver. A very expensive diver. Elena did the math in her head. Sterling's fuel inefficiency alone was costing Stratosphere nearly $150,000 a year. His salary was another $350,000. Add in the potential litigation costs from his HR issues, and Captain Richard Sterling was a $500,000 a year liability flying at Mach 0.85. She looked up from the screen. Beverly was walking down the aisle, serving breakfast. The service was impeccable. Beverly was kind, attentive, and efficient, despite the stress she was clearly under. That is the airline, Elena thought. People like Beverly, doing the hard work, while people like Sterling take the credit and burn the profits. Elena felt a cold resolve settle in her stomach. The incident at the gate hadn't just been a personal insult. It was a symptom of a systemic rot that she had been hired to cut out. Sterling wasn't just a jerk. He was bad for business. She closed the laptop. The cabin was quiet now, most passengers dozing or watching movies. They were 4 hours into the flight, somewhere over the dark, freezing expanse of the North Atlantic. The sun had set behind them, and the cabin lights were dimmed to a soothing violet. It was time. Elena unbuckled her seatbelt. She smoothed the front of her hoodie. She didn't look like a CEO. She looked like the woman Sterling had dismissed as riffraff. That was exactly how she wanted to look when he saw her again. She walked to the front galley. Beverly was tidying up the coffee station. "Beverly," Elena said softly. Beverly jumped slightly. "Yes, Miss Vance. Can I get you anything?" "Yes," Elena said, her voice calm but brooking no argument. "I would like to visit the cockpit." Beverly froze. The color drained from her face. The cockpit? Now, Miss Vance, usually we only allow visitors on the ground before pushback, and given earlier events, I'm not sure Captain Sterling would be amenable. I understand your hesitation, Beverly, but if you check my passenger profile again, you'll see a specific authorization code under the Special Services tab. Code Delta Oscar 1. Beverly hesitated, then tapped the code into the galley touchscreen. Her eyes went wide. Delta Oscar 1 was the highest level of clearance in the system. It practically meant the person owned the plane. I see, Beverly stammered. I still have to call the captain to ask permission to open the door. It's protocol. Call him, Elena said. Tell him the passenger from 1A has a critical issue that needs to be discussed face to face. Beverly swallowed hard. She picked up the interphone handset. Elena watched her. She felt bad for putting the purser in the middle of this, but it was necessary. Captain, this is Beverly in the forward galley. Yes, sir. Everything is fine. Sir, the passenger in 1A is requesting a cockpit visit. I know, Captain, but her profile has a Delta Oscar 1 clearance. Yes, sir, I understand. Beverly hung up. She looked terrified. He's not happy. He said you have 2 minutes, and if you cause a scene, he's putting you in flex cuffs. Eleanor almost smiled. Thank you, Beverly. You're doing an excellent job. Beverly entered the secure code into the keypad on the reinforced cockpit door. There was a loud clack as the magnetic locks disengaged. Beverly pushed the door open just enough for Eleanor to slip through, then quickly pulled it shut behind her. The cockpit of the 787 was a compact miracle of engineering, bathed in the glow of a dozen large LCD screens displaying navigational charts, engine diagnostics, and radar sweeps. Beyond the thick windshield, the night sky was an endless void of stars, the moonlight glinting off the clouds far below. The noise was different here, a louder, rushing sound of wind friction against the nose of the aircraft. Captain Richard Sterling sat in the left seat, his headset on one ear, looking out the side window. He didn't turn around when Elena entered. In the right seat sat the first officer, a man in his early 30s named David Chen. Chen looked back at Elena, his expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He knew who she was, or at least he knew she was the woman Sterling had tried to kick off. He offered a tentative, almost apologetic nod. Sterling ignored her entirely for the first 10 seconds. It was a power move. You exist only when I acknowledge you. Finally, with an exaggerated sigh, Sterling swiveled his chair halfway around. He kept one hand on the yoke, as if to emphasize that he was the only thing keeping them alive. His eyes widened when he saw her. He hadn't expected the hoodie. He expected a suit, someone from the FAA, maybe. You, Sterling spat. The word was heavy with venom. How the hell did you get on this aircraft? I ordered the gate closed. Your gate agent was following protocol, Captain, Elena said, her voice calm, carrying easily over the cockpit noise. She didn't shrink. She stood in the small jump seat area behind the center console, towering slightly over him as he sat. Protocol, my orders are protocol, Sterling snapped. He glared past her at the closed door. Beverly, get on the interphone. I want security meeting this plane in London. This woman is trespassing on a federal flight deck. I'm not trespassing, Richard, Elena said. He ripped his headset off and threw it onto the console. The first officer, Chen, flinched. Don't you dare call me that. You don't know me. You're a disruptive passenger who got lucky with some glitch in the computer system. Now get the hell out of my cockpit before I divert this plane to Gander and dump you in Newfoundland. Elena didn't move. She just looked at him. She looked at the man whose ego was writing checks his career couldn't cash. You're not diverting anywhere, she said. We're going to London, and we need to talk. Talk? About what? Your little power trip at the gate? You think because you complained to some mid-level manager and got an override that you won? He stood up, maneuvering awkwardly in the tight space, so he was face to face with her. His breath smelled faintly of coffee and peppermint. Listen to me closely. I am the captain. On this ship, I am judge, jury, and God. You are luggage, self-loading cargo, and I don't like your attitude." "My attitude isn't the problem here, Captain. Your metrics are." Sterling blinked. It was the first crack in his armor. "My what?" "Your fuel consumption, your maintenance write-ups, your HR complaints, your refusal to utilize the automated descent protocols." Sterling's face went from angry to baffled, then back to furious. "Who the hell are you? You're hacking our systems. Chen, call headquarters. Tell them we have a corporate espionage situation." David Chen looked terrified. He started to reach for the radio. "Don't touch that radio, Mr. Chen," Elena said. It wasn't a shout, but the command whip cracked through the small space. Chen froze. Elena turned her gaze back to Sterling. The moment had arrived. The karma he had ordered back in Chicago was about to be delivered, piping hot at 35,000 feet. "You asked who I am," Elena said, her voice dropping lower, steely and precise. "You assumed I was a security risk because of what I was wearing and what I look like. You told me I didn't belong in first class. You told me I didn't belong on your plane." She paused, letting the words hang in the pressurized air. "My name is Elena Vance, formerly a senior partner at Vance & Associates, specializing in corporate mergers and acquisitions." Sterling's brows furrowed. The name rang a faint bell, something he'd skimmed in a company newsletter he'd immediately thrown away. "And as of midnight last night," Elena continued, "I am the newly appointed Chief Executive Officer of Stratosphere Airways." The silence in the cockpit was absolute. Even the wind noise seemed to fade. Sterling stared at her. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His eyes darted to her hoodie, then back to her face, trying to reconcile the image in front of him with the words he just heard. "You're lying," he whispered. But there was no conviction in it. The Delta Oscar 1 clearance, the override at the gate, the chairman's name she had dropped. It all crashed down on him at once. "Mr. Chen," Elena said, not taking her eyes off Sterling, "would you please pull up the company internal news feed on your EFB?" The first officer fumbled with his electronic flight bag tablet. His hands were shaking visibly. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned the tablet so Sterling could see it. There it was, the headline banner in Stratosphere blue: "Stratosphere Airways welcomes Elena Vance as new CEO." Below it was a professional headshot of Elena, wearing a suit, yes, but with the same determined eyes that were currently boring into Sterling's soul. Elena leaned in closer to Sterling. "So you see, Richard, this isn't your plane, it's mine." The air in the cockpit was so thick with tension, it felt pressurized to double the safe limit. Captain Richard Sterling stared at the tablet in his first officer's shaking hands. The photo of Elena Vance, poised, powerful, and undeniably the woman standing 3 feet away from him, burned into his retinas. He looked back at Eleanor. The hoodie she wore no longer looked like slacker gear. In the context of her identity, it suddenly looked like the eccentric choice of a tech billionaire or a Silicon Valley mogul. His brain frantically tried to reframe the last 4 hours. He hadn't kicked off a nobody. He had tried to strand the woman who signed his paychecks in the Chicago slush. "This," Sterling stammered, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the bravado that had served him for 30 years. "This is some kind of joke, right? A hack? The guys in IT put you up to this?" "I assure you, Captain," Elena said, her voice dropping to a register that was terrifyingly calm. "It has better things to do than prank a pilot with a fuel efficiency problem." Sterling flinched at the mention of the fuel again. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up fully, trying to regain his physical dominance. But the cockpit was cramped. He couldn't tower over her without hitting his head on the overhead panel. He just looked large, clumsy, and cornered. "Look, Miss Vance," Sterling said, shifting gears so fast the transmission stripped. He put on his charming rogue smile, the one he used to talk his way out of missed flight briefings. "Let's take a breath here. We got off on the wrong foot. It was dark, early morning, stress of the job. You know how it is. We have to be vigilant. Safety is the #1 priority at Stratosphere. I was just aggressively protecting the brand." Elena tilted her head, studying him like a specimen in a jar. "Is that what you call it? Protecting the brand?" "Absolutely," Sterling said, gaining a little steam. "We get all sorts of riffraff trying to sneak into first. If I let standards slide, the whole airline suffers. I was just doing my job. Maybe I was a little zealous. But you have to appreciate a captain who runs a tight ship. I appreciate a captain who follows protocol, Richard, not one who invents it." Elena stepped closer, entering his personal space. "You didn't check the white businessman's bag in seat 2B, she said softly. "You didn't interrogate the teenager in 3A who was wearing pajamas. You singled me out. You saw my skin, and you saw my gender, and you decided I was riffraff. That isn't protecting the brand. That is exposing this company to a multi-million-dollar discrimination lawsuit." Sterling's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. "Now wait a minute. I am not a racist. I have friends who are—" "Stop!" Elena cut him off. "Do not finish that sentence. You will only dig the hole deeper." She turned to David Chen, the first officer. The young man was practically pressed against the window, trying to become invisible. "Mr. Chen," Elena said. "Yes, ma'am. I mean, Ms. Vance. How long have you been flying with Captain Sterling?" 3 months, ma'am." "And in those 3 months, has he ever asked a white passenger to gate-check a compliant carry-on bag?" Chen swallowed hard. He looked at Sterling. Sterling's eyes were wide, a silent plea, or perhaps a threat, to keep his mouth shut. But Chen looked back at Elena. He saw the future of the company. He saw the woman who held the keys to his career. "No, ma'am," Chen whispered. "He hasn't." "Traitor," Sterling hissed under his breath. Elena ignored the slur. She fixed her eyes on Sterling. "You see, Richard? The culture of silence you rely on is over. I was hired for one reason: to clean house, to modernize this airline. And that doesn't just mean buying new planes. It means retiring the dinosaurs." Sterling's fear turned into cornered aggression. "You can't fire me," he sneered. "I'm the union rep. I have tenure. I have a contract. If you touch me, the union will ground every flight from here to Tokyo. You'll have a strike on your hands on your first day." Elena smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. "I'm a lawyer, Richard. I specialized in contract law before I moved into operations. I know the union contract better than you do. There's a clause. Section 14, paragraph B. Conduct detrimental to the company. Publicly humiliating the CEO. Attempting to deny boarding to a corporate officer without cause? That's gross misconduct. It bypasses the grievance process entirely." Sterling went pale. "But," Elena continued, checking her watch, "I'm not going to fire you right now." Sterling blinked. You're not?" "No, because we are over the Atlantic Ocean, and I need 2 pilots to land this plane safely. And despite your personality defects, you are technically qualified to land a 787. She stepped back toward the door. "You will fly the rest of this leg, Captain. You will follow the automated fuel descent path exactly as the flight computer dictates. You will speak to air traffic control with professional courtesy. And when we land in London, you will remain in the cockpit until every single passenger has deplaned. Do you understand?" Sterling gritted his teeth. He was being dressed down in front of his subordinate. It was the ultimate humiliation. "I am the captain of this vessel," he muttered. "Yes," Elena said, opening the door. "But I own the vessel. Fly the plane, Richard. Don't make me come back in here." She slipped out of the cockpit. The heavy door clicked shut. Inside, the silence was suffocating. David Chen slowly turned back to his instruments, afraid to even breathe loudly. Sterling stared at the door, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the yoke. For the first time in 30 years, Captain Richard Sterling was flying scared. The remainder of the flight was surreal. In the cabin, the service was flawless. Elena ate a warm croissant, reviewed spreadsheets, and watched a movie, just like any other passenger. But the energy had shifted. Beverly and the other flight attendants treated her with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. They sensed the shift in the universe, even if they didn't know exactly what had been said in the cockpit. Elena, however, wasn't relaxing. She was using the airline's Wi-Fi to send emails. She messaged the London station manager. She messaged the VP of Human Resources in New York. She messaged the chief pilot. By the time the wheels of the 787 touched the tarmac at Heathrow, the stage was set. The landing was the smoothest Elena had ever experienced. Sterling had clearly been sweating over the controls, terrified of causing even a single bump. He buttered the runway so gently that the passengers barely felt the transition from air to ground. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling's voice came over the intercom as they taxied. He sounded strained, his usual swagger replaced by a tight, robotic tone. "Welcome to London Heathrow. Local time is 2:06 p.m. Please remain seated." He rushed through the announcement. He wanted off this plane. He wanted to get to the hotel bar and drink until the memory of Elena Vance disappeared. The plane pulled into gate 42. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Elena stood up. She grabbed her backpack, the backpack that had started a war. She waited. Usually the pilots would open the cockpit door immediately to say goodbye to the first-class passengers. Today, the door remained firmly shut. Sterling was hiding. Elena walked to the aircraft door. The jet bridge was connected. The British ground crew opened the hatch. Standing right there on the metal bridge, waiting in the freezing cold tunnel, was a delegation. At the front was Sir Julian Hartsfield, the European Director of Operations for Stratosphere Airways. He was an older British man in an immaculate suit, flanked by 2 other executives and a woman holding a tablet. "Ms. Vance," Julian said, stepping forward with a warm, genuine smile. He extended his hand. "Welcome to London. I'm terribly sorry about the confusion in Chicago. David called me." Elena shook his hand. "Thank you, Julian. It's been an educational flight." "I can imagine," Julian said, his eyes darting to the cockpit door, which was still closed. "We have a car waiting to take you to the Canary Wharf office. But first, is there anything you need?" "Yes," Elena said. She didn't move from the doorway. Passengers were starting to file out behind her, looking curious at the welcoming committee. "I need the flight crew to join us. Right here." Julian nodded to the woman with the tablet. She stepped onto the plane and knocked sharply on the cockpit door. A moment later, the door opened. David Chen came out first, looking relieved to be on the ground. Then came Sterling. Sterling had his hat pulled low. He had his flight bag over his shoulder. He looked like a man trying to sneak out the back door of a burning building. When he saw Julian and the executives, he froze. "Ah, Captain Sterling," Julian said, his voice clipped and cold. "Please join us." Sterling stepped onto the jet bridge. He was trapped. Behind him were the passengers he had flown. In front of him were the bosses he answered to. And in the middle was Elena Vance. "Sir Julian," Sterling said, his voice wavering. Good to see you. Smooth flight. Arrived 10 minutes early. I noticed, Julian said. Ms. Vance was just telling me about her boarding experience. Sterling's eyes darted to Elena. Look, Sir Julian, it was a misunderstanding, a security protocol. We can discuss this in the debriefing room, privately. I don't think privacy is necessary, Captain, Elena said. She stood tall, the cold London air biting at her cheeks, but she felt on fire. You humiliated me in front of a terminal full of people. I think it's only fair we have this conversation in the open. The departing passengers were slowing down as they walked past, sensing the drama. They recognized the woman in the hoodie from the gate argument in Chicago. They saw the high and mighty captain, now looking small and sweaty. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd. That's her. That's the lady he tried to kick off. Is that the boss? Look at his face. He's terrified. Elena turned to Sterling. Richard, you told me that you have the final authority on who enters your aircraft. You are correct. But I have the final authority on who flies for this airline. She held out her hand to the woman with the tablet. Do you have the document? Yes, Miss Vance, the assistant said, handing Elena a single sheet of paper. It had been printed in the Heathrow office 10 minutes ago. Elena looked at the paper, then at Sterling. This is a formal notice of suspension, pending an internal investigation into discrimination, insubordination, and gross misconduct, Elena said, her voice clear and carrying down the jet bridge. Effective immediately, you are grounded. You are not to enter a stratosphere cockpit. You are not to wear that uniform. You are to hand over your company ID and your badge right now. Sterling stared at the paper. His world was crumbling. You can't do this here. Not in front of the passengers. Not in front of the crew. You did it to me, Elena said simply. Karma, Richard, is a mirror. It reflects exactly what you put in front of it. Sterling looked at Julian for help. Julian just stared back, stone-faced. Hand over the badge, Richard. With a trembling hand, Captain Sterling unclipped his ID badge, the symbol of his status, his power, his identity for 30 years. He placed it in Elena's hand. And the wings, Elena added. Sterling looked up, tears of rage and humiliation welling in his eyes. The wings are mine. The wings represent the company, Elena said, and you no longer represent us. Slowly, agonizingly, Sterling unpinned the gold wings from his chest. He dropped them into Elena's palm. He looked smaller now, just an old man in a suit that didn't fit right anymore. Mr. Chen, Elena said, turning to the first officer. Yes, Miss Vance. You flew an excellent approach. You're the acting captain for the return leg tomorrow. We'll fly a new first officer out tonight to assist you. Chen's jaw dropped. Acting? Captain? Me. Congratulations, Elena said. She turned back to Sterling. Sir Julian, please have security escort Mr. Sterling to the terminal to collect his personal effects. He can fly home tomorrow, in economy. Understood, Julian said. Elena put her backpack over her shoulder. She didn't look back at Sterling. She walked up the jet bridge, flanked by her executives, walking toward the future of her airline. Behind her, Richard Sterling stood alone on the metal ramp, stripped of his wings, stripped of his pride, watching the woman he had underestimated walk away with his career in her pocket. News travels fast, but in the digital age, scandal travels at the speed of light. By the time Elena Vance walked into the Stratosphere Airways headquarters in London's Canary Wharf, an hour after leaving the airport, the incident was already trending globally. A passenger in row 2, a young tech entrepreneur named Sarah Jenkins, had filmed the entire confrontation on the jet bridge. The video, titled "Pilot Tries to Shame Black Woman, Realizes She's the CEO," had amassed 3 million views in 45 minutes, Elena sat in the corner office that had been prepared for her. It was a stark contrast to the cramped economy seat she usually flew in for personal travel. The view of the Thames was breathtaking, but Elena wasn't looking at the river. She was looking at the data coming in from the public relations team. "The sentiment analysis is 98% positive for you, Ms. Vance," said David Thorne, the chairman, who had flown in on a private jet to meet her. "The public loves it. They're calling it the undercover boss moment of the decade, but the shareholders are worried about the pilot union's reaction." Elena turned her chair around. She looked fresh, despite the transatlantic flight and the emotional combat. She had changed into a sharp navy blazer, transforming fully from the traveller in the hoodie to the executive in charge. "The union won't strike, David," Elena said confidently. "I've already spoken to the union president, Mike O'Malley. He saw the video. He saw Sterling refuse to check the white passenger's bag while targeting me. Mike knows that if they try to defend Sterling publicly, they'll look like they're endorsing discrimination. They're going to cut Sterling loose to save the herd." She was right. By 5 p.m. that evening, the pilots' union issued a brief statement. "We stand for fair treatment of all passengers and crew. We do not condone the actions displayed in the video from Heathrow. We will cooperate fully with the internal investigation." It was the death knell for Richard Sterling's career at Stratosphere. But the story didn't end with a firing. For Elena, that was just the demolition phase. Now came the reconstruction. Over the next month, Elena Vance implemented what came to be known in the industry as the Vance Protocol. It was a sweeping reform of Stratosphere's hierarchy. She removed the captain's authority clause regarding subjective appearance assessments at the gate. She mandated unconscious bias training for every employee, from the tarmac tossers to the board directors. But the most significant change was personal. Elena didn't retreat to the ivory tower. She continued to fly. Once a week, she would pick a random route, sometimes economy, sometimes business, and fly as a passenger. She wore jeans. She wore sneakers. She watched. The culture of fear that Sterling and his old guard cronies had instilled began to evaporate. Flight attendants like Beverly, who had spent years walking on eggshells around arrogant captains, suddenly found their voices. They reported safety issues without fear of retribution. They smiled because they wanted to, not because they were ordered to. Efficiency improved. Fuel costs dropped by 6% in the first quarter, largely because the younger pilots felt empowered to use the automated systems Sterling had despised. The toxic cowboy culture was replaced by a culture of precision and respect. As for Captain Richard Sterling, his karma was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, freezing grind. Stratosphere Airways didn't just fire him, they revoked his pension benefits under the gross misconduct clause, the very clause Elena had quoted to him in the cockpit. He sued, of course, hiring a high-priced lawyer named Arthur Pendleton. But when the discovery phase began, and Stratosphere released the flight data logs showing Sterling's years of fuel waste and safety protocol violations, Pendleton dropped the case. Sterling was blacklisted by every major carrier. Delta wouldn't touch him. British Airways laughed at his application. Emirates didn't even send a rejection email. 6 months later, a Stratosphere crew was on a layover in Anchorage, Alaska. David Chen, now a fully promoted captain, was grabbing a coffee in a small, drafty cargo terminal used by regional freight haulers. He saw a man in a faded, generic pilot uniform. No gold braid, no prestigious airline logo, wrestling with a frozen cargo net on an old, beat-up propeller plane. The man looked older, grayer. He was shouting at a box of frozen fish that wouldn't fit. It was Sterling. He wasn't flying Dreamliners to London anymore. He was flying supply runs to remote outposts in the Arctic Circle. No first class, No warm nuts, no flight attendants to bully, just him, the cold, and the cargo. Chen watched him for a moment. He thought about going over, maybe saying hello, maybe offering a moment of grace. But then he remembered the fear in the eyes of the passengers Sterling had humiliated. He remembered the silence in the cockpit. Chen turned around and walked back to his heated, state-of-the-art jet. Sterling had claimed he wanted to protect the brand. In the end, the brand was doing just fine without him. Elena Vance went on to lead Stratosphere Airways for 15 years. She became a legend not because of the merger she brokered, but because of the day she stood at Gate K4 in a hoodie and refused to be moved. She proved that power doesn't come from a uniform, a title, or a seat in 1A. Power comes from knowing exactly who you are, even when the world tries to tell you otherwise. The airline's stock tripled, customer satisfaction soared. But Elena's favorite moment remained a quiet one. 1 year after the incident, she was boarding a flight to Tokyo. The gate agent was new, a young man who looked nervous. Elena was wearing her signature hoodie and backpack. "I'm sorry, Mum," the young agent said, glancing at her ticket. "This is the priority lane." Elena smiled. She didn't get angry. She didn't call the manager. She just lowered her sunglasses, looked him in the eye, and tapped the name on the boarding pass. The agent looked at the name, Elena Vance. He looked up, his eyes going wide with recognition and awe. "Miss Vance," he gasped. I didn't recognize you. Welcome aboard, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for everything you've done for us." "Just doing my job," Elena whispered. She walked down the jet bridge, not as a conqueror, but as a leader. And as she stepped onto the plane, she looked at the cockpit door, now always open during boarding, a symbol of transparency, and winked. The sky was clear. The turbulence was gone, and Stratosphere Airways was finally flying right. And that is how Captain Richard Sterling learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Never judge a book by its cover, and never judge a passenger by their hoodie. He thought he was the king of the sky, but he forgot that even kings have to answer to the person who builds the castle. Elena Vance didn't just win an argument. She dismantled a toxic system and rebuilt it with dignity. It's a powerful reminder that true leadership isn't about how loudly you can give orders, but about how well you listen to the people you serve. Sterling ended up freezing in Alaska, while Elena soared to new heights. It's the ultimate karma, cold, hard, and absolutely just. What would you have done if you were in Elena's shoes? Would you have fired him on the spot, or did she make the right call by letting him fly one last time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served at 30,000 feet, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about arrogance getting exactly what it deserves. Thanks for watching, and fly safe.